As I mentioned a moment ago, in amongst everything else happening today, we've had this latest wages data. I looked more at these figures and the impact of the government's IR agenda and spoke a short time ago to the Workplace Relations Minister Tony Burke. I began by asking for his reaction, first of all, to the news those 4 Aussie surfers have been found safe and well.
Those reports are just so welcome. I think there's plenty of Australians who viewed Indonesia as a fantastic place for holidays and fun and have had great times there. And we were all holding out hope for the news that now seems to have come through.
Now let me get on to wages. This is slower than expected growth for wages, isn't it? Is this a sign of the slowdown we've been expecting?
Oh no, the quarterly figure that's just come out is at 0.8. That means we've now had 3 quarters in a row of 0.8 in wages growth. You need to actually, in terms of previous government, you've got to go all the way back to before the 2014 budget to find a 0.8 figure. So this is actually part of a strong wage growth story. And this is the moment when we talk about real wages. We've been talking for ages about when would we get to the point that as inflation moderated, that wage growth caught up with the rate of inflation. This is that moment. This is the quarter where wage growth is at 0.8 and inflation is at 0.8. So we're finally at the point now where those lines start to cross and hopefully now moving in towards the territory of real wages growth again.
So does this make it easier or more difficult for you to make the case in terms of your IR reforms and further lifts to wages?
I think what this proves is what we've been saying all along, that you can get wages up while you're getting inflation down. And that's, for the people who've run the hysteria about wage price spirals and things like that, what we've seen is inflation moderating at the same time that wages are growing. That builds the argument as to why we need to close loopholes that undercut wages. Ultimately what you want in people's households is for the money that's coming into the household to be more than keeping pace with the bills that are going out. And we've now had 11 consecutive quarters, so 3 years, where wages were not keeping up with prices. This is the first quarter where they've met, and looking forward now to the opportunity where wages start to get in front. But that only happens, 1, because we changed the laws, 2, because we've been working with the Commission and arguing for wage increases, and 3, because of the legislation that I'll be introducing to close down those loopholes that undercut wage growth.
All right, how are discussions with businesses and unions progressing, and when will we see that legislation on casuals, same job, same pay and the other measures?
I've always wanted to introduce the closing loopholes legislation as soon as it was ready. I'd hoped it would have been ready when we were in Canberra over the last couple of weeks. It wasn't, and the reason it wasn't ready was because the consultation's been going well. So the behind closed doors consultation has meant that there's been different drafts of legislation and different concepts and policy frames that have been put forward. And sometimes unions have spot unintended consequences, sometimes the business organisations have found unintended consequences. They've fed them in, we're constantly amending, but I'm very hopeful that when Parliament returns in September, that we'll be ready to go by then with legislation to put into the Parliament, and hopefully to get it through hopefully to be able to get it through by the end of the year, but you're always in the hands of the Senate in being able to do that.
Has your department or Treasury given you an indication of how much these reforms might lift wages by?
Look, the legislation that we put through last year was the legislation that was moving wages across the board because of what it was doing with bargaining and how it affected the total operations of the Fair Work Commission. What we'll see with this year's ledge, the impact across the board in total wages is not as great. But for individual workers who are affected by these loopholes, it's very significant. So, for example, the criminalising of wage theft. If you're a worker who is experiencing wage theft, us being able to act on that in such a direct way makes a big difference for that worker. Similarly, the job security outcomes for a casual who's being rostered as a permanent casual and who wants to actually make the transition, for that individual, big change in security. And what you describe as the same job, same pay, what I describe as labour hire loophole, there's a very limited number of workplaces that are engaging in that loophole. For those who are, for the individual workers, it can be a really significant difference in their pay. So the summary of what you put with what's the total impact across the economy, the impact of this legislation will be very modest, but the impact for those individual workers who are affected detrimentally by these loopholes, it'll make a really significant difference for their take-home pay.